Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend. Episode 8, our commentary on iHeartRadio's podcast, Stuff You Should Know. Their episode is entitled How Dog Training Works.
Yeah, and I think context was another point that we kept bringing up with that podcast, because when we talk about dominance and a dog's motivation or their insistence or their, it all depends, because a lot of it was framed as like you're crushing your dog's spirit. But if a dog's insistent or motivated or, all these things sound great until you add a little context. Well, motivated to do what?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's good, great, okay. Sometimes it's not. I mean, I don't want my dog motivated to bolt out of my door and run down the street. I don't want my dog motivated to like bite the mailman the day for some reason he can get to him, So there are certain things that just because the dog wants it, because dogs they do what makes sense to them, which without training isn't always the same thing that makes sense to us. And it's not always acceptable.
Right.
There's definitely lots of pitfalls that come with allowing dogs to be dogs. I've heard that one before. And, and to a minor extent, I kind of agree, if dogs want to play around and, my dumb dog, for whatever reason, doesn't lay in the bed I bought him outside. He lays on the floor, like right next to the bed. And I'm like, all right, whatever, dogs are going to be dogs. He doesn't like it for whatever reason. That's fine. But it is my job to keep him safe, even from himself.
Right. And I think, again, it's understood by people who use the terminology. And don't get me wrong, there are people who skew it because they're insecure or have aggressive tendencies themselves. I totally get that. But what we're trying to say when the word dominance is used or we redefine it, we have to make sure that we understand as dog owners that we take the role, the responsibility as the influential force in the relationship with our dog. Right? We're the ones guiding them through what needs to happen. We're the ones that are telling them what we like, what we don't like, because ultimately the dog has to understand how to live within our lifestyle. And a lot of times I see people with their dogs who they want to be equals to the dog, or they put the dog above themselves, right? The dog's needs are the most important. My needs mean nothing. Right. So I know people who haven't taken vacations because their dog has separation anxiety and they can't leave the house because they feel that badly about it. Right. So really when a dog trainer refers to dominance, they're trying to say kind of take that influential role as for the dog. Right. In essence, be the parent. And they refer to this as well. Alpha male, alpha female is just mom and dad. Right. And a lot of times what happens is we see in relationships, people are taking the role of the buddy, the roommate, the best friend, in some situations, the girlfriend or the boyfriend of the dog. Right. And we just want to just reiterate, we want to make sure that our audience knows you have to make sure that you take the responsibility of being the influencer in the relationship. Right. That's that. Okay. So that's section 1. So that was kind of our notes on section 1 of what we wanted to talk about. I hope that gave you guys a more of a broad, I just wanted to give you guys more of a broad understanding of that. All right. So now, second thing, go ahead and talk about part 2. What did they talk about, Mariano?
Techniques for dominance theory. So that's when we get into a little more of the practical kind of how-to. So they were talking about things like the alpha role, dominance downs, like pinning the dog to the ground or pinning the dog to a side, or showing the dog that you're in charge. And a lot of it, I think, had connotation that went backwards and, and really focused on the owner or the trainer. That was like, if your dog goes outside to go for a walk, it's possible they just want to go for a walk. Or don't automatically assume that the dog is like walking past you in the doorway because they want to prove to you that they're in charge of you.
Right. I don't think they're thinking that in depth.
No, well, I'm framing it the way that it was framed in the podcast.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So that's how it was presented. It's a point that I would be a little more lenient on if it wasn't like really hammered home, like on 3 separate occasions. Because again, these guys aren't dog trainers, so I'm really I'm cutting them slack because like they did some research is good and they have dogs. Both of them have dogs they were talking about. So I know that they've done some training, like to the extent that satisfied them and their household and what the dogs need. But again, you can't have a fair like argument or debate when you're painting one side as it is and another side as you think it is, which is just not real.
Right. When you're kind of putting your opinion into it already without knowing the alternatives.
Right. Well, even the opinion would be okay if it was based on more like modern factual stuff.
Right.
Right.
True. Man, I wish they would have interviewed us. That would have worked out just
Should reach out
great.
to them. That'd be
I know.
cool.
We'll hopefully we'll tag them and they'll see this.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go into. Give me 1 second. Hold on. I'll cut this out if I need to. All right. So let's see. Uh-oh. Where'd my notes go? Come back, notes. Where did you go, notes? All right, there we go.
Where'd
Nope.
you go?
I missed you so. Okay. So this is where they really talked about dominance techniques,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this is where they brought up the alpha roll. They brought up the pin downs, Shoba. Reality of it is, when it comes to grabbing the dog's neck, alpha roll, dominance, pin, all this stuff that we saw on TV at some point in our lives, or maybe we adopted as dogma for us and our dogs. It's bullshit. I mean, and mind you, and this is coming from a person when I was 18 years old. I tried all of this shit. Let me explain to you guys what happens when you pick a physical fight with a dog. Mariano, maybe you can answer this. What happens when you pick a physical fight with a dog?
You get bitten.
You get bit. So automatically, if you've tried it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, you are going to get a physical reaction from a physical action that you put on the dog.
Yeah. And
right?
frankly, I mean, rightfully so, if you're doing this crazy stuff, like, it's, there are certain
Right.
things in the dog training world that it's our job to discern when a dog does something. It's not that it's not understandable to some degree. Like if a dog's wanting to chase a squirrel, I get it. I don't
Right.
begrudge the dog, but at the same time, that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. But
Right.
if you're like kicking a dog's ass and he bites you, you get no sympathy from me.
Right.
So there's certain things that definitely you should not be doing.
You should not be doing. And all of these things, when you pick a physical fight with an animal, you always run a very high risk of getting physically challenged back.
Right.
And this is the number one issue. This is the number one issue with physical dominance, right? Physical dominance should only be used to help help control a situation, not to punish or impugn the dog, right? So if I need to move my dog, I need to support my dog, I need to hold my dog, all of that stuff. But yeah, it's not necessarily the best. Now, parts of this that I disagreed with was when they were starting to kind of talk about training tools as dominant dog techniques,
Mhm.
right? This is something that's commonly happens where people villainize tools when they're inanimate objects, right? I think one of my mentors used to give me the comparison. He goes, um, you know, what is a pencil, right? And I'll be like, I would say like, oh, pencil is like something that you write with. He goes, what else could it be used for? And I said, to erase something. And he goes, what else could it be used for? And I was like, and then he pulls out a pen and he goes, what's a pen? And I said, it's a writing device. And he goes, right, it writes things. And then he goes, it could write you a check for $1 million, or I could stab you in the eye with it, right? The pen by itself does not have a negative connotation, right? It's what you do with that pen that makes it a good or a bad item, right? And so this is what we see a lot with training collars and training tools is people will look at a training tool without ever using it or having an opinion, and they will automatically judge it and then refrain from using it. When in actuality, what we've seen is the people who have refrained from using some of the tools out there that might seem evasive or intrusive, these are actually the ones that save the dog's life, right? Because it gives the owner a whole new different style of control that they've never had before. So the only thing I really disagreed with was this idea of that leash jerks were bad. Yes, definitely leash jerks in constant leash correction, that just tells me that the training method you're practicing is wrong, the timing is wrong, the stimulation levels are wrong. We want to definitely be the least intrusive, minimally aversive, totally get that. But if you're doing this constantly with a lot of force and aggression, it's just like grabbing your dog with your hand and pinning them down or being physically aggressive. You do run the risk of pissing the dog off or at some point getting a defensive reaction from the dog. However, when training tools are used properly, choke chains, pinch collars, martingales, slip leads, they didn't even name any of those, but they do the exact same thing. When training tools are used properly with the right foundation and the right technique, they can be huge game changers in the shaping of behavior and the maintenance of behavior throughout the rest of the dog's life. So this is just a big point I want to make, because so many people who do not have experience with training tools have opinions with them. That's like me, having an opinion on surgery, right? Like if, let's say my kid, this is kind of extreme, but let's say my kid had a tumor that needed to be removed, and I couldn't bear that the kid had to go under surgery. But I asked the doctor, I said, you know what, doctor, is there any way for us to get that tumor out without surgery, without scalpels, without needles, without anything, just because I don't like the way that those scalpels and needles look, right? The reality of it is there's a tumor that needs to be removed. And there are certain tools that allow and assist us in the removal of that tumor, right? Or that issue, right? And so what we have to do is what we have to understand is the tools by themselves are not bad. The tools used in malpractice can be extremely bad. But at the same time, tools should just be used to support the effort and eventually phased out completely as a necessary tool to continue the dog's behavior. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it's all about application. A tool is just a tool. Anything. I mean, even a more controversial tool like a firearm, like it's anything. I mean, if you are constantly rewarding a dog with food, there's got to be downsides to that. So
True, and we'll talk about that as well.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
podcast.
So context, and there's so much in dog training that my issue, my like main issue with just the whole formulation of this podcast that we're responding to is there wasn't the necessary context, it seemed like, but only when it came to corrective measures. When it came to reinforcing and really like treating and encouraging certain behaviors, they were giving examples of timing with clickers and whatever the case. And then with other stuff, it was just kind of this Saturday morning cartoon of some horrible, like, suspicious guy who thinks his dog's out to get him.
You got a hammer and you scratch.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get that.